Ladies and
Yeah.
gentlemen, love to introduce you to David Yarus. He is the founder of Millenial. He is the founder of JSwipe. He is a incredible inspiration to so many worlds and so many universes. I know David for many, many years now, and we wanted to have a conversation and cover as much as we can about marketing, fundraising, millennials, and all that good stuff. So, David, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
David, here's where I want to start, okay? Something very timely, okay? You just came out with the love study, okay? So let's just jump right into it. Let's talk about that. How did that come about? What is the results? What is the feedback that you're getting from the community about that? Go.
So I've had, a fascinating, few years of a journey, completely unexpected, but ended up, really since the last maybe 5 years ago when we started JSwipe, doing a lot of speaking at different Jewish conferences, getting, deeply acquainted with federations, foundations, organizations across the Jewish world. And, when I would go to these annual global convenings of what I see, as we believe to be, the leaders in connecting and assuring, a strong Jewish future, organizations and conferences or events, I feel that there is a pretty serious and for me, a bit alarming lack or absence of critical, honest, real, open, vulnerable dialogue about the millennial Jewish experience, or like what I feel that my peers and friends and cousins and colleagues are experiencing and thinking, Jewishly, and what the establishment, either wants us to think or thinks that we think, but very little dialogue between the two. So usually it's feels more like of a pep rally, like things are good, we're doing it. And by the way, things, we are doing a lot of good. And then here's like a token millennial panel for an hour. And I'll take that spot, and it's an honor. But a brief conversation is unfortunately not really addressing the core of the fact that most of my peers, friends, colleagues, cousins, etc., are like not engaged, they're not inclined, they're not interested, and getting to the root of why, addressing that, understanding that, are more, people leaning out than in this generation. And it's, by the way, not just a Jewish thing. Generationally, millennials are less traditionally religious and more, spiritual and intentional and mindful, across the board. But just this study came about to give a voice to a generation in a way that was as, unfiltered, as, no agenda other than creating a space for this conversation to occur, and ideally prompt dialogue, from there. So that's how it came about.
So you felt that there's this real disconnect between this young, budding generation and the official, the official voice of the Jewish people.
I call it Big Jewish.
Big Jewish. Okay. And you wanted to sort of shift the conversation, turn the spotlight onto the younger generation, and give them a real collective voice.
Collective voice that honors the individuality across the board, meaning there's many different voices. So by no way do I presume or assume that there's a singular, united front of this is what Jewish means to me as a millennial that people would share universally, for sure not. But I want to distinct that I don't think that I think that there is a gap or a rift. I think that if we look at any of the numbers of either federation giving or synagogue attendance or pretty much all metrics Jewish, right, for sure in the data, and in the general alarm level, I think, or concern of, much of the conversation around next gen, that's pretty clear. So then my question in sort of my interest in it is, okay, knowing that, coming from that place, let's try to create a working understanding of actually what is going on in these people's lives and what does being Jewish mean to them. Is it important to them that they date someone Jewish? Why not? Is it important to them that they marry someone Jewish? Why not? Lots of the conversations that are, I find, often avoided because they're like either trigger topics or like sensitive, and we don't even want to bring this up because, we don't want to stir up the pot. Frankly, because we had no reason not to, I wanted to go right for them and really dig into all of the questions that I've been wondering, that I personally, have been grappling with myself, and that I know are, really critical items to understand more broadly for how can we create a bridge that, continues the, traditions and the essence of what our parents and grandparents' generations, practice and want for us, while also maintains, our truth and is something that we are interested in.
What are some of the most surprising things that you've seen in the study?
So the first thing I would say is that one of my favorite things about it, because that question has come up a lot since we launched it last week, is that it's kind of, to me, not like anything was like mind-blowingly, wow, that was so unexpected, but it was more, I feel like the way when I read the first time, I think Tipping Point or Outliers or anything by Malcolm Gladwell, it's like, oh, like those concepts, like I kind of am familiar with it, but now I have very clear language and understanding of a framework of how to relate to them. So questions like, I would ask everyone over the last many years, wherever I go, what are you looking for in a partner? Or is it important to you to date or marry someone Jewish? And so from years, I could have told you that, yes, because it makes it easier to honor my parents, shared culture, values, traditions. Like there's all different answers in the ethos. But now we've been able to take 4,000 answers from across the world, and B, all denominations, and then actually code them thematically to understand proportionately what are the answers that people are giving, at scale, and then by the volume of what's the primary reasons why people actually say that now, or what's the primary identifiers of what it means to be Jewish, or what people consider like what makes someone Jewish, all of these things, by virtue of, representing the voice of the generation.
We're gonna share some of the screens over here when we do this and when we present this video. But when I read this study, okay, things seemed very promising toward the positive, okay, like, how likely are you to marry Jewish? And things seemed very positive. Now, when you put that, you reflect that against like the Pew studies, which was like this, horror story of the results and the sort of the feedback and the of the Pew study. Why do you think? How can you tell me a little bit of how you would contrast this? Is it just that you interviewed like a more niche arena of people, and therefore you just got a more positive response? Like, did you just get a more engaged audience?
I think it's an important question, because if I were to answer you, what would be my most surprising thing that I found from it? It would be that across the board, it seems much more promising than I would usually think or speak about, where I'm saying, critical, red alert, alarm. And yet, if we look at the data, it's people are much more, how important is your Jewish identity to you? 4 out of 5 on average, right? Or all of these things are, highly indexing for being more likely or more engaged than you would think based on the conversation, or out there on Jewish millennials. My presumption is that the reason for that is because we are pulling from a 4,000 person JSwipe user audience. So they're that much more inclined to be, if you're on JSwipe, even though we have people from literally all, the whole spectrum of Jewish identity or Jewish practice denominations, you're that much more and that much being undefinably like more inclined to have a propensity to be inclined to all of the different things that we're talking about. So it was more of a versus, for example, if we were able to get a representative sample of all of the people, including all of the fully disengaged, unaffiliated, and, never would I ever be on JSwipe people, and I would love to get that voice, but this does not encompass that voice. This is those that are inclined to some
One thing I noticed, David, is that a lot of Chabad people were sharing it. It went like viral among the whole Chabad community and the WhatsApp groups and everything because Chabad did really well and they really scored.
Yeah, Chabad.
They
It's
scored
funny you
really
say
high.
that.
Yeah,
Chabad was the most it was one of the most popular. Well, it was the number one for gifted or people who are basically like what Jewish organizations do you support? So the most likely to be supported was Chabad, and I think it was like top across a couple of other things too. But yeah,
yeah.
and I get it. I get it.
But,
By the way, yeah.
I do think that's an important point because people on JSwipe are not your average Chabad guy or gal. So it's your more secular, more modern, more people who are using dating apps, right? I'm sure there are a few Chabad guys and gals on JSwipe, but I'm sure it's a very low person.
The rebels and the renegades.
Yeah, but it's a low amount.
Hashtag Chevra.
Yeah, exactly. but that does give some color to what you're dealing with here. You're dealing with a more secular, more unaffiliated, more, but Chabad does score high in where they would give to, where they're engaged to. So I think that does give some color to what type of demographic we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So that's great. So in regards to the giving trends, did you find that this was were you surprised by the giving trends?
Well, by the virtue of the question of do you support Jewish organizations, yes or no, 70% said yes, for sure surprising. I would think it would be, I don't know, far less. And then the types of organizations, the second after Chabad, if yes, which Jewish organizations do you support? Second one being synagogue, temple. Third being federation, etc. Like, yeah, I mean, I would be surprised by that because I would typically think based on the conversation around temple, synagogue model, having some challenges right now because millennials don't want to pay for anything or what have you. I wouldn't have expected that to be that high, for
Right.
sure. But it was beautiful. I also loved seeing the difference in giving between the different denominations, between the different ages.
Right.
Yeah.
This is, so everyone who's watching, this is a fascinating study. We're going to share the results that David put together with his team. David, we have a lot of nonprofits that are listening and watching, hopefully, all three of them. And we get studies all the time, especially in the nonprofit world, right? Giving USA, and we're constantly being fed this data. Now, this report is a unique data set. What can nonprofits do with it? How do we put this to action? Or can we not? Is it just a nice, novel thing to look at, or are there ways that we can put this to action?
I mean, the first thing that I would say that I would hope for, like, what would success look like for this report to be, in my mind, fulfilling its purpose, or at least the reason for being that it exists, would be to get it into the hands and through the eyes of leadership across the Jewish world, just to have that much more of an understanding of the millennial Jewish audience to some extent, and the varying views and voices across that, and ideally to start or prompt a conversation between the two, because there's this this phrase or idea that I have, which is there's hundreds of millions of dollars a year being spent pushing fueling the Jewish Oldsmobile forward, and millennial Jews want the Jewish Tesla. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like, but I know that it's not going to be figured out without, at the very least, a joint conversation, or by empowering Jewish millennials to figure out and design what that looks like, in a period, full stop.
Got it. Yeah. So, David, I'm looking forward to your study being quoted for years to come in articles. And I want to hear students shouting, "Whoa, in the love study, it said that 70% of Jewish people do want to get married." So I want to see people quoting it. I think overall, it is a overwhelmingly hopeful results. And that's why I think everyone needs to read this study. Okay, let's shift our focus before this study came around, we had this whole roster of things that I wanted to talk to you about. So let's go all the way back to the early days of David Yarus. Now, David, I've known you for, I don't know, somewhat of a decade right now. And I remember in the early days in our conversations, we used to have conversations and talk about some of the wild things that you did on campus, some of the guerrilla marketing things that you did for all the different projects that you were involved in. Now, when you know, nonprofits, marketing is always something that is difficult. Got to get the budget, got to get things approved. And unlike businesses that they don't always have the, it's not a mainstay, it's not a given that if you want to promote a project, if you want to promote a new project, a new capital, that you have this ability to do a big marketing campaign. And therefore, I always say that guerrilla marketing is the way to go. How do you find unique, very low cost ways to really get to the people in an organic way? So can you tell us a little bit about, I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the early guerrilla marketing stunts that you've had experience with, and what can you share with your average nonprofit organization who's looking to get their message out to the community?
Okay, wow. Well, maybe, I mean, I'm inclined to start with the second question, but I'll go with the first. My background is in originally event planning. I started in Miami Beach throwing parties for like all of the Jewish high school kids in the area. And what I learned when I went to school, I was in school in Boston at a small business school called Babson, focusing on entrepreneurship, and continued to throw events there. I learned that what I was doing without really realizing it was basically word of mouth marketing. And that was harnessing, before now influencer marketing became a thing, harnessing nodes of, different influence networks by having one person from this campus and one person from that campus and one person from that campus represent a brand or an event. And then through that network, distribute products, distribute information, distribute, opportunities. So the first thing is, especially in today's day and age, we all know that, that people are, specifically millennials, but really everyone has grown immune to commercials or clutter, right? The average stat, and I heard an even more recent one that was like significantly higher, but the average person sees between 250 and 3,000 commercial messages every day. And so we literally tune it out, right? And so therefore the question is, how do we reach them if we're either adding ad blockers on our browsers, or we're having TiVo or Netflix, or we're really bypassing all of the more traditional ways of getting out there? The most impactful, most effective method that's always, found that way through research is word of mouth, through trusted friends, family, peers, colleagues, what have you. And so the first thing is a mentor of mine, Matt Britton, has a quote, which is that people are becoming more like brands and brands are becoming more like people. And in that, the first side of it, it means like people are now, carefully curating their Instagram feed to almost literally what a brand manager would have done for a business, back in the day or even still now. But on the flip side, brands are becoming more like people, meaning you are the representation of the people who attend you, who are your staff, who all of your people, that is the brand. So how do we empower the people who are either attending or supporting or, building the efforts and the, organizations in the Jewish world to really be those ambassadors? So that's one piece. The power of word of mouth marketing. Guerrilla marketing, I mean, I think one of my favorite lessons from that was when we would give out sabra hummus on college campuses, and we would every morning pick up in this big yellow ice cream truck that we got on eBay and drove up from New York City to Boston.
Wait.
Yeah.
Say it again. I don't remember this.
It's a long story.
What did you do? I got to hear this.
I was in Israel. It was the year after graduation, and I decided that I already knew this business was going to, start. It was called Buzz University. It was a college marketing, guerrilla firm that would help brands reach college students under the premise that we're not tuned into the traditional media outlets. So let's go through word of mouth and or offline guerrilla to get into their lives where the people are. And somehow, I just got this, I got this download, which was we had to have an ice cream truck, because in order to transport thousands and thousands of packs of hummus, by the way, this is before hummus was cool. Right now, hummus is like avant-garde cool, but like this is like 5 years ago when 10 years ago, when people looked at us like hummus was the weirdest thing they've ever heard of. And instead of getting like a van, because the whole concept, like the premise of a van, I didn't want to be driving around a van, but you could be damn sure I'd be driving around some old yellow ice cream truck.
Yeah.
So we got a yellow ice cream truck.
Some guy in a van giving out hummus is pretty creepy.
You know? So anyways, we got this ice cream truck. And while we would go out and give them out across campuses all over in Boston, New England area, one of the most fascinating learnings, and I love it. I did all these like social studies essentially in the process of doing this to really refine and perfect the, you know, the otherwise seemingly simple art of distribution or guerrilla marketing, which was basically, let's call it herd mentality, right? College campus, you're on Comm Ave at Boston University, and right, we're positioned in the key areas where you know, when class gets out, everyone walks through this intersection, and then the bell rings and we're all loaded up, we're ready to go. The way that it works is hundreds of people get let out at once. And so there are lines and lines and lines of people walking through the sidewalks. And let's say there's a red light, so they kind of queues up, and then green light, and then people start walking in this long mass line, right? Inevitably, if the first person in line, if I'm standing there and I would you like a hummus? And you say, or in the first person in line walking by makes a visible veer, like, right, get out of my way because I'm busy and I'm on my phone. I don't want to talk to a stranger on the street trying to give me something. Literally, everyone behind that line, for as long as that row goes, will just veer away because we rely on the subconscious cues of, the people around us to determine, I guess, social behavior of what we should or shouldn't do. And on the reverse, if the first person in line was like, amazing, I would love one, we would instantly be mobbed by everyone around us. And I always found that just fascinating. It's just so funny and interesting to me.
Did you plant people to say yes?
Oh no, that's next level strategy. The client didn't have the budget for that, but that's a great idea. That's one learning. And then I think, just to answer your other question, what are the most important things that nonprofits can do today? I would like to say that we're at a place of having a conversation of being like deep innovation and really, really, cracking the code on the future. But to be totally honest, we're not there. I don't think, by and large. There are some, outlier innovators that are really pushing the limits. But I think the most important thing today is that, first of all, guerrilla marketing and guerrilla marketing spends even 10 years ago are now, I would probably prioritize spending whatever you would have spent on guerrilla marketing on targeted digital ads, which are measurable, hyper-targeted, optimized, A/B tested. Like, there's so much more we can do and see from a central location rather than the hard costs that were related and actually having to put feet on the ground on all of these campuses. For example, that's a different, it's a college specific, but broadly speaking, targeted social is the most effective, usually first step 1, A, B, and C, that I would make sure someone is employing and maximizing to get out there. But even before that, and I think this is the,
David, I'm going to stop you.
Yeah.
You taught me how to do Facebook target marketing.
Whoa. Yeah, I remember.
That was probably, 7 years ago. I was working at a startup, and you gave me a crash course. And today it's gotten even way more advanced. So you've been a fan of this for a long time.
And based on results, you know what I mean? Like, I want to spend my time, energy, dollars, resources going to whatever tactics, not necessarily one, but in this case, it usually is always the top performing, that just that return the impact I'm intending to have at the most efficient, rates at the highest scale.
Right.
And so
I think it's important that for everybody listening, there's a huge difference between just boosting a post and then what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is taking advantage of the algorithms that we now have access to, and really taking the time to hire a professional to say, okay, we want to target this and this type of person living in this and this type of area between this and this age with this and this interest, and we can get to those people.
Oh yeah, and we could see, how effectively they're clicking, how effectively they're then donating or buying or signing up for whatever it is. I mean, it's a whole world out there. The one thing I would say is, caveat, it doesn't need to necessarily be hiring someone or hiring a professional to do this, because reasonably, and depending on the size or scale or scope of the organization, it's all, free for learning on something called Facebook Blueprints, which is their, Facebook owns Instagram, so it's comprehensive of both platforms. and it's their crash course of the 101, 201, 301. It goes deep.
So they don't have to call David. They don't have to call David Yarus.
And text. I prefer the text. But one more really important point about your question, because even before we start talking about marketing or getting the message out, I think the most common miss in the Jewish organizational world and probably beyond is aesthetics. Right, we're living in an era where everyone, it's maybe scary or sad, but we spend hours and hours a day on our devices, and the 80-20 or 80% of the time we're spending on like a tiny few amounts of websites that basically have billions of dollars going into making them the most beautiful, the stickiest, the cleanest, that they could be. So at a subconscious level, we are now we have an expectation of excellence when it comes to creative, aesthetic, usability, and just generally how a brand looks, sounds, feels, touches, etc. And so I like to think generally in marketing and allocating spend, what is in our control and what is out of our control. And I like to make sure first I crush everything within our control.
Nice.
In our control is, how does your website look? How does your emails look? Do you use this? Like all of the, is your website mobile optimized? Does everything look good? That is truly fully in your control. How does a certain audience or neighborhood respond to your, offering? Out of your control. But so many people are missing the mark on, having the basically most beautiful websites, most beautiful, marketing tools. And the last thing I'd say is that it used to be that you had to hire a web developer to do this, or you had to hire a graphic designer to do this. And by the way, you still can, but there's websites like Squarespace, right? That lets you click without being a developer, or something like WordSwag or Canva, which lets you be an unbelievable graphic designer without even being an artist.
Yeah.
It doesn't replace, but it just really makes, the emails that I get from, not going to say which, but a federation, not New York, don't worry, that have 17 different font sizes and 5 different colors. And they're just so jarring that I don't even look at it because, and that's, I think, unfortunately, a broad experience across the
right. There's no question that creative development has become very commoditized. And there's a lot of I was going to say DUI. Yeah, no, there's not a lot of that, hopefully. But there's a lot of do-it-yourself tools out there. Some of those that you mentioned we use in our company, and we encourage organizations to use. So let's shift a little bit. So a few months ago, I wrote an article. The title of the article is Millennials, Schmillennials. Now, you may not remember, David, but you liked that article. And I would appreciate it that you liked it, because when I wrote the title, I said, if I post this on Facebook, I hope David Yarus doesn't have an issue with me writing an article, Millennials, Schmillennials, because he's Mr. Millennial. But then you liked it, and all was good in the world. But the point of the articles was, and this is where I want to segue into that. My view is that we put a little bit too much attention on isolating millennials into their own universe and treating them like that their own alien species, and trying so hard to understand what makes them tick and what makes them go and what thing. And my thesis was, and seen this through my experience, was that instead of isolating them, why not integrate them into what you're doing as a nonprofit, right? When you ask them for some examples of integrating them, is if you're going to ask a millennial for $50, well, what's my $50 going to go? But if it's being matched by 3 non-millennials or 3 maybe very wealthy millennials who aren't your average millennial, and their $50 can turn to $100 to $200, right? That's one example of matching funds. Another example is when you're doing events. Yes, sure, there's the time for the wine and cheese and the rooftop parties, but there are also the time that you can bring millennials into meeting them with Holocaust survivors, and having them meet students, and having them meet elderly people or people who have been around the block, and integrating them into the world, and the magic that comes through that integration and through the leveraging of the different generations. From a perspective where we're not underestimating, right, their what they want, and not just treating them as if they're some kind of young selfish species. What can you tell organizations that are looking to really build a community of young people?
Oh, wow. Okay. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. The first is, before I get into that, I have to sort of comment on I think derivative of the millennial schmillennial, concept, which is oftentimes, first of all, by no means am I saying that every conference should be about millennials and that we should all have task forces about engaging millennials. That's not my position. But what I do believe is that oftentimes I'll hear either from federations where they're like, like it's not a conversation right now, or it's not a priority one because they're not the donor dollars right now. They're next donor dollar, like next gen, their next decade donor dollars. But right now, we're focusing where the dollars are. And the other idea of, oh, this has happened before, they always go away and then they'll get married and they have kids and then they'll come back. Well, first, on the then they'll come back when they get married and have kids, I believe, although if you have a more updated stat, last year, 71% of non-Orthodox marriages were interfaith marriages, and therefore 71% of the couples that you're hoping are going to be coming back into the system, I would just, asterisk that as a definitely not definite in my mind. Temples or synagogues are, the models are being challenged. So the synagogues that we're presuming that they're going to go back to when they come back, I'm not sure they're going to be around as abundantly, as in a decade or whatever, if we don't actually have some of this conversation, right? If we aren't able to engage them, bring them on. And so now to go to your second question, or the back half of that, which is what do we do? The first thing I would say is meaningful, like even in the premise of the way you framed the question initially, it's like either we do something specific with them, or rooftop and cheese or whatever, or we can like actually invite them into our organization and have them be integrated. I guess my question is, by integrated, do you mean mothership is the organization and we're going to integrate them by pulling them in to the mothership level? Or do you actually mean integrated where we're meeting in the middle and we're having a conversation here? So our ideas and ways of being and views and outlooks on life and the world and religion, etc., are being integrated with our parents and grandparents' generations and the agendas of these organizations. So I would question the idea of integration, of what that looks like, is the first.
Right. Well, yeah. So
real quick, because everyone's sick of being like the puppet invite committee, right? Like I call it like the puppet board, or where like there's all these big organizations have their young professional board or whatever, which really means give us X $1,000 a year. We'll throw your name on some, events that we do, which are more of like the wine and cheese ones you're talking about. And like, please send out invitations to your friends. And everyone's in on that game or that joke. Like no one's excited about that. And I think what we need to do, or what would need to happen, is an honest co-creation dialogue around this is what our organization essence is about. This is our mission. This is our purpose. Now, with that, we'd like to create a container to have a conversation around, based on what you now know is important to us and what we are intending to do. What is important to you and your peers and your colleagues and your, et cetera. And then how can we use the resources and mission and, that we have available with your creativity and your ideas to start having a conversation? Because personally, I'd feel much more likely or inclined to give or support or engage or integrate with something that's actually integrating with me and my world and my friends, not me integrating into an existing framework that, is trying to integrate me into it, or is trying to sort of pull me up into an unwavering or framework.
Right. Well, so in the context of millennial engagement when it comes to philanthropy, right? So people want to give, they want to feel that they're making a difference, right? When you give to charity, you want to feel like that your money is actually being spent. It's going to a worthy cause, but it's actually having some kind of a dent in some way, shape, or form, right? So the challenge is when you look at the philanthropy landscape and the opportunity really is that you have these let's call these three levels of givers. You have these, the youngest and the ones that are coming straight out of college and they're going straight into their work and they're paycheck to paycheck. And then you have that maybe more established young adults, 30s, 40s, is making a decent salary, maybe even six digits. And then you have your mega philanthropists. The challenge that I'm finding and I'm seeing, I think that the untapped opportunity is that going to those individual sectors and trying to give them the sense of impact and going to them individually may have worked till now, but it's not working going forward, right? So having a one-on-one meeting with a major philanthropist and asking them for a $500,000 check or $1 million check, 30, 40 years ago, their expectation was, well, there wasn't really an expectation from the organization more than their word or more than maybe, their 20, 30 years of work. But if you wanted to start a new project, if you wanted to do something new, if you wanted to grow something, the donor had to really just give out of let's say in Hebrew, like lishma, to just give it, and hope and trust that it would go to the right cause, right? Today, philanthropists are getting a lot wiser and they're saying, 1 second, I can actually get some real-time data here if this is actually a project that needs to be funded, or if the people who are running it are the right people to fund it. And let's go to the younger generation and let's see, are they each going to put $10 or even $50 towards this project? And sometimes it adds up to a lot, right? Sometimes that $10 from hundreds of people does add up a lot, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily add up to a lot in actual dollars and cents, but it does give that major philanthropist that collective real-time data saying that, wow, I can now get, and it's not just a survey, it's like people separating with their money, saying that, yes, I'm going to give $50 to this event or to this project or to this new program, right? So I see it that more than ever, the value of the integratable participation between all fronts is so much more. So I think the message to the millennials is that your impact that you can have for an organization today is greater than ever. Because the real money is all with the 1%, right? We know that. I mean, the chunk of all the gelt in this world is held by the few. But if you're but you have the power to unlock those funds. You have the power to give that 1% the data. Sometimes it's just with your $10 or your $50 to say, hey, you should give $1 million check to this project. Why? Why should you give it? Well, because me and 500 of my friends just gave $10. We're the ones who are probably going to be the recipient of this program, most likely. So my question is, it's not a question. It's just that bringing some insight to this big millennial world, and something that I'm trying to push in all of my conversations and articles and everything is that. I think millennials are much more powerful than they actually believe that they actually are, and not because they could potentially become a donor. And I think it goes to your point, right? It's more than just engage with them now, because one day they'll be rich, or one day they'll want to put their kids into the school. No, actually, the value for the millennial engagement and donor is right now. Because it's giving that real-time data to the real people with the real funds that this is a good cause.
I have a thought. First of all, I agree. I think that's interesting, the compounding power or impact. So I could feel like I'm not having a smaller, impact, but rather a broader one. I agree with the premise and the framework. So I agree.
Thank you.
I guess my question is this. Let's do honest talk, right? Between you and I and whoever's watching. So hello. Have you had meetings at, a bunch of in New York City, let's say the big global Jewish organization headquarters? Have you seen there? Have you been there?
Sure.
Oftentimes big offices, multiple floors, sparsely attended or whatever, kind of not very dense. Have you seen the hyper future R&D centers and innovation centers of where in those offices?
You're talking about nonprofits? You're talking about companies?
Jewish organizations, the global Jewish organizations based in New York City.
So I'm very happy that you're bringing it up, because this message, I feel, has not penetrated there. I'm seeing it more on, we have about a charity, we have about 5,000 clients over the last 6 years. And I'm seeing this happen on your average day school. I'm seeing it happen on your average Chabad house, right? Chabad is huge on our platform, and other Jewish outreach organizations on our platform, and all different types of schools, and even Habitat for Humanities and Boys and Girls Club. I'm seeing that we're seeing it happen in that mid-level nonprofit. I have not seen it yet penetrate the nonprofit that you just described.
But just I feel you, and that makes sense to me too, because they actually and the impact could be greater for the mid-level or the small level than the super large level. But I guess my question is, and maybe I'm leading the witness, so I'll try it once more and then we'll see. I'll share what my thoughts are. But you've been to some of the global Jewish organization headquarters in New York City, right? I presume, and they have multiple floors, huge offices, oftentimes 100 person staffs, large teams. And the next question was have you seen their the R&D innovation centers with the latest and greatest technology and everything?
No.
100% no. I've never seen it. My fundamental thought is yes, I agree with the compounding impact of the shared economy. In this case, we participate in shared everything in our lives, and this Uber, Airbnb, all of the things. This is essentially shared giving, and so fully value aligned and I guess ideology aligned. But I think an underlying premise in this conversation that I feel called to bring up is a general trust and belief, and this is actually what you opened it with, in the fact that my dollars given to this organization, whether they be mere few, small dollars or compounded into the double, triple, exponentially more dollars, are actually being used to their fullest, maximized, and really getting the most bang for the buck. Because I actually am on the other side of that, where it's not that I don't trust them, obviously. I think they're acting in integrity, but I definitely don't believe that, they're pushing the front lines of innovation. I think instead, it's mostly an establishment in a system that's this is the system. So yet there's, there'll be a little, fun for some R&D ideas from the people and et cetera. But I don't trust that my dollars are going to the maximum use in the Jewish engagement and Jewish future given to most of these, organizations. If anything, I would choose to, I feel much more inclined, much more inspired to give my dollars to the entrepreneurs and the future Jewish experience that are usually some of the most innovative work that I'm seeing out there. And more often than not, because they're outside of the system, they spend more of their time trying to sustain themselves based on trying to figure out funding through this and that than actually doing the innovative work that we need them to do as a Jewish world, right? So I think that there's another premise of the giving to the big dogs or giving to the lone wolves.
Right.
Personally, I feel more emotionally and actually believe more in the potential impact of helping the lone wolves who are outside of the system and oftentimes the innovators.
Right. So it's so interesting that you're saying this, David, because that is a problem. That's a global problem, right? That's a problem with young people not wanting to give to big institutions because their money is just going to sort of just get washed away in this black hole and pay for 100 salaries. And I'm not looking to pay for 100 salaries. I'm looking to pay for a meal for someone to eat right now or a child to get educated. But I would challenge that in saying that, and your premise is right. And you do. And everyone has a limited amount. By the way, if anybody on this call would accuse you, David, of not giving to some of those more established institutions, I actually have experience. I know you give.
Well, I do. I'm not saying I don't. I just feel
so just in case.
I don't trust that my dollars are being fully maximized.
Right. But just so everybody watching over here, again, all three of you.
Thank you.
David happens to be somewhat of a philanthropist, and I've had personal experience of knowing that he gives. Sometimes he gives with the whole, cheshbon, as we say, calculation. Sometimes he just gives because he's a good man. But I will tell you this. We need the big institutions, okay?
Tell me why.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. We need the big institutions because the big institutions are doing big things. Now, that does not mean to say that those big institutions don't need some real disruption, and they don't need some real, facing the music. And I think actually holding the millennials accountable, the millennials can hold them accountable. Okay, here's how. Here's how. Okay, to just say, okay, let's get rid of the old institutions. Well, what do you want these small institutions to become? Eventually, you want them to become big institutions that can hire people and that can sustain itself. What I'm proposing is what I'm seeing happen here is this shared responsibility in giving, where even larger donors, where even larger organizations can create that greater transparency, right? It has to be a scalable solution, right? The bigger organizations have to come down and they have to start creating real transparency. And the smaller ones need to obviously take our money so that they can grow. But the smaller ones, yeah, that's easy, okay? Give to, like you mentioned, that's easy to give to. I agree. It's, the distance from where your dollar is being, taken out of your pocket, and it's the closest distance between how you work hard to spend it and the food that's going into the mouth. But I think this shared responsibility that I'm talking about in giving can make some real change with big organizations, because when a big organization has a chance to get $1 million gift, okay, and some would question whether they should get that $1 million gift. What I say to your average philanthropist is, before you give that $1 million gift, let's go to the people. Let's see what your average millennial is going to say about this project and this time, or the people who are actually running this program, right? Or how they're spending their money. Sure, there's overhead, sure, all that good stuff, but let's go to the people. I would say that, and I tell this to philanthropists every day, and on our platform we generate this reality where, let's go to the people. You give your $1 million if and only if 500, 1,000, 10,000 millennials will say, okay, yes, here's my $50 towards this. So the integration of, and that's why I say it's so important, the integration of the different level givers is, I believe, the greatest opportunity that we have today, because we have this uber connected graph that we could do instantly. We could run a 24-hour campaign, a 36-hour campaign, and we could put up a match for $1 million, and we could say, well, the community's either going to put up the money and say, we do trust this institution at this time with this amount of money, and therefore we are going to give $20 to this cause, right? So it's this integratable giving, the shared giving, that gives the power to not one millennial, but to the collective voice. You did a study, not with one millennial, some guy in Williamsburg with a beard, right? You went to 4,000 of them, and you said to these 4,000 of them, like, what are your interests? And you presented the collective vote, right? When you go out and you do, whether it be a fundraiser, whether it be an event or anything, and you say, like, okay, what's the collective say of the young donors who can give $50 to $100? Do you want this project? Do you want this program? If so, then we'll get that big support. You see how powerful now the millennials could be to help even the bigger institutions to hold them more accountable?
In short, yes. Right? In short, yes. I think that millennials are, have the power to, I guess let's call it, vote with their dollars, like you're suggesting. I think the riskier game that we're in on a longer time horizon is that they will be impacting and voting with their engagement and affiliation levels, right? Which is ultimately, really what's, yes, we need the dollars to fuel the now, but like on the time horizon of, 5-10 years, I don't know if we can wait for the amount of change or, reimagination or redesign of the big establishments that it will take until it's all locked and loaded and sort of in step. I don't know if we have that amount of time. Now, by the way, just to clarify, because you said something, and I just want to make sure that it's definitely not seen as my words or my belief. By no means do I think that the big Jewish organization shouldn't exist. They can do their thing, and bless them, because they are doing unbelievable amounts of impact with unbelievable amounts of scope across levels that I couldn't even imagine. No doubt, full stop. So full respect, kavod. And I believe, like, from the brief, from across all of the different touch points and experiences that I've had, that as someone who initially thought that maybe I could give my passion and purpose towards impacting the system, towards efficiency and innovation and et cetera, it's such an unbelievably uphill battle based on layers and based on tradition and like this is how we've been doing it, based on decision-making power structures, usually being the oldest people in the room or the donors who are not the youngest people. Based on all these things, it's so hard to actually make a dent, let alone an overhaul. That I personally, while I'm still very much engaged day to day, literally, with supporting the big Jewish organizations, with understanding and engagement of younger people, social media, digital marketing, all of these things for sure, and will continue to be, that I personally, for my personal passion, purpose, impact, et cetera, has been to start building like alternative operating systems.
Right.
Frankly, as a fail safe. Right? Not because I want to do it, by the way. I'd rather be chilling in a jungle, by a beach, in a van, like much more prefer to be doing that day to day. But for me, it's more of like okay, well then, yeah. Okay, and so in my last thought about reaching and engaging millennials, and it's interesting because this actually goes close to home. I have my, a conversation with my dad about this, anytime I'm back home in Miami, which is this idea that he's a big supporter, involved in the, Jewish community of Miami and the different things. And we have this conversation where he's like, he has, these organizations that he supports and I love them and they're all great. And his premise is like, if these people, usually younger people, if they only came to this Shabbat table, if they only saw the magic there, they would realize what's missing in their lives. And the only thing I'd like to say to, the Jewish organizations or leadership that might be listening is that, like, my friends, my colleagues, my peers, my cousin, like, people aren't walking around being like, wow, gee golly, like there is a void in my life and it is where the Jewish piece of the puzzle used to fit or would fit. Like, people aren't walking around thinking that there's a void. If anything, we're overstimulated and have too many things to do so that there's no time to actually even think about that void. But rather, the opportunities presented to us and the ways that we can find connection and community and, conversation and love and all of these things are so vast that it's not like that we have to change the premise of why they would want to come to this experience, why they should be here. It's not because something's missing and they're walking around, empty. People are walking around pretty full. The question is, how do we get the flavor of what we're, of our product or what we're packaging to taste as good or better to them than the other things that they're choosing to spend time doing, to invest their energy, resources, dollars, minutes of the day into. And I think that's a super, super important piece.
Gotcha. So let's say we had a tiny bit. So your average young person today, okay, they have that few bucks that they can give on a weekly, monthly, annual basis, right? And what should they be looking for? Can you give us, David, a list, top 3 things they should be looking for in a nonprofit before they separate with their hard-earned funds?
Top 3 things that they should be looking for in a nonprofit?
And maybe they know, let's make it easier. They know a nonprofit and they want to give to them. Okay. They're somehow brought value into their life. But when making a decisive decision, because it's never one, it's 1 or 2 or 3, right? What questions should they be asking the nonprofit? What questions should be looking for? What should they ask themselves before giving to an organization?
Question number 1 is, okay, you just switch it up with what are you asking yourself? I mean, something that I
up for you, David. I'm not trying to make this easy for you.
So I'll be very open and honest and share exactly, a conversation that I've been having with myself and with some others, over the last little while. And again, either way, we'll always continue to be supportive of, in the Jewish world, et cetera, no question. But like something that is hard for me to swallow is this idea that again, there are hundreds of millions of dollars a year going into building bigger and shinier buildings and going into, for a wealthy, generally, community to engage in this or that better, right? When at the same time, on the other side of the world, there are people dying because of disease. There are people based on, I don't know, lack of clean water, lack of food, etc. So the first thing, if you're going to switch it up on me, I'll share openly and honestly that they should ask themselves is, with a given resource, like their fixed given level of resources that they have within them, how do they want to allocate that and prioritize that which they give? That's the first question. And I don't think it's all or nothing, right? But that's the first question I would ask. So if you're asking yourself something, where do you want to have, that's an important one. Now, in terms of questions that they would ask the organization or that I would ask an organization would be directly, where is this going? And or can I direct where this is going, right? Like I remember recently there was doesn't matter which organization, but a biggie emailed me for the annual email. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to continue. Am I able to direct donate where, like, let's call it social media or millennial engagement? Can I help direct where these dollars go? And basically, in short, no, wasn't able to. And like, I think that's only going to work a little bit longer, or I hope it works longer but I don't believe in that model. So where specifically will this impact be going, or may I direct where that's going, is a personal question that I would ask. I guess what they should ask themselves are in evaluating, like, where will my dollar for dollar have the greatest impact, right? Like I have a friend's organization. She's incredible. I think it's one of the most, beautiful, new, out of system, or out of the establishment, efforts from a really passionate young woman in the Jewish world, who the only way that this even exists still today, is because she was just steadfast against all odds to get it to the point where she has. Like, where will my dollars have the biggest impact? No question that it will do more for her dollar for dollar than than a biggie or whatever. So where will I be able to have the biggest impact? And maybe those are the three questions I would ask.
You know what I'm realizing? I think this is a good thing ultimately, because what's happening is nonprofits always had to be accountable to their constituents, right? It's just the nature of the beast, right? Businesses have to be accountable to their shareholders. Nonprofits have to be accountable to their donors. But I think until most recently, those people that they need to be accountable to were the mega donors, the ones who were giving the big bucks. I think the big overall message here that I'm getting from this, David, is that nonprofits now have to be accountable to the average person, because the average person knows sort of you're coming to me because I am of value to you. Whether that because a little bit from a lot of people adds up, or because I am the future, or because for whatever reason, I think that the organizations are starting to get the message, and also the donors are starting to get the message that they need to now be accountable to everyone. And I think that's going to make organizations stronger and better and smarter and more accountable to themselves.
God willing, yes. Yeah, I sure hope so.
Yeah.
No question. It's funny you say that, because like with the stat that you shared a couple minutes ago about 70, or what, basically the amount of the stat that you shared a couple of minutes ago about the amount of donors coming through digital forms or platforms, increasing exponentially or to some extent over the last year, it being a good thing or something, because that represents like younger people. What's interesting to me about that is what it also presents is the idea of, let's call it sort of the universally connected world, where now, before, maybe let's talk about our grandparents' generation, you pretty much knew of a couple of organizations that were, either active in your community or the ones that because they're like the governing bodies of the Jewish world. And there was let's say a limited set presented to you. But now, if I'm a, millennial, hippie that wants to care about, I don't know, something in this corner of the world because it's an important cause to me, because of the increase of directed giving through digital, that's much more accessible to me.
Right.
But now it's not just, let's call it competing or appealing, within the Jewish world or sort of landscape. But now it's, where do these dollars go? And as millennials are increasingly, let's say, less and less broadly traditionally religiously inclined, right, and more connected and universal and passionate about many causes, I think it's important that we recognize, like, as we're going through someone's news feed, right, as you're sitting there, and we're a Jewish organization that's trying to get some support because we're doing really incredible work. I want to make sure that people don't think that I don't believe that. Like, we're doing really incredible work. We have to recognize that we are in the same news feed as the cause they care about the wildlife, as the animals, as the people across the world, as all of these other things in their feed. And it's not just like, oh, I have X dollars. Like, am I going to, like, which Jewish organization am I going to give it to? But it's rather, I have X dollars. I believe that as an individual, I can have an impact. Where do I want to have this impact? And I think it's
no question. Access today is unprecedented. And for you to rise above the tide and above all that noise, it takes a lot more of these best practices and to be aware of these things and to be doing a better job, no question. So let's just close up with just two or three a little bit lighter questions, and we just got into a nice heated debate, so that was good. What are some of the latest trends right now that are happening in communication specifically? Okay, so what are some of the biggest things right now, most important things right now to tools, platforms, methods of communicating to a younger audience?
Latest trends in communication, besides, as you discussed earlier, like the critical impact of targeted social media, would be, I would say, video. Right now, the latest trend, but all of the platforms are prioritizing the impact that video has on their platform. So we see across all of our campaigns that typically video tends to perform better than static imagery. However, interestingly enough, it isn't always, or often isn't, the hyper polished, hyper produced video, but rather the video that looks more first person, like I took it myself on an iPhone or I took it on a GoPro, that looks more organic. The hypothesis is because it's coming through your news feed, and we instantly can sense when a high polished video is like high polished and an ad, versus if it looks more like something that your friends would be sharing, it's less likely to sort of be screened out by your subconscious mind. That's another. Of course, bite-sized content. The last stat I heard was something like the average millennial has an attention span of 8.6 seconds, which is less than the memory of a goldfish at 12-something seconds. Therefore, by the way, that doesn't mean that they won't watch longer or engage with longer form content, but it means as someone's swiping through their feed or as someone's sort of going through their life, you have that much time to catch their attention. Once you catch it, everyone's, is open to, of course, engaging with things that interest them further than that. But bite-sized content, so rather than long-form essays or 60-minute videos, in the newsfeed as your appeal, not going to work. Think about it as the fact that they're in line at Starbucks or they're, on the go or on the subway platform. Like, it's quick hit or miss, and hopefully will help people hit more. And
what about, are you seeing things change or advance in the actual messaging, right? So what are you seeing the younger generation respond to a certain type of message versus another type of message? So direct call to action versus something more engaging?
The most authentic and organic seeming possible. So anything that seems most like an ad doesn't work as well as something that seems more organic. So I would say direct call to action. I don't think that means it shouldn't have a call to action, but buy now versus like, this is now available through the rest of this month or whatever. Like, there's a way to finesse our messaging so that it is more likely to resonate. Organic and transparent. Organic, authentic, and transparent, I think, are the key pieces for the messaging.
So here's my last question. So there's been a lot of talk about sharing in real time, right? Documenting your experience or your journey, whether it be a leader of a nonprofit, someone involved in the nonprofit, versus like producing these perfect productions. What can you tell your average nonprofit? How can they put this to use?
I think the most important thing, and this has been on my mind a lot, I took a trip that changed my life 5 years ago with the Schusterman Foundation, something called Reality Trip to Israel. And then within the last year, I went to Schusterman Reality in partnership with JDC and Twine. I went to India to understand the impact of the JDC's different work in different, communities in India. And then just last month, I went with Israel in partnership with Reality Schusterman to Puerto Rico to understand their fast action first response work there. And in both cases, on the ground, when I'm there, when I'm all up in the experience, it is so clear, like the need, the impact, the everything, that I'm energized. I feel it. I'm like, okay, let me at it. Where do I go? What do I do? How can I help? Right? But that gets lost in translation through not being documented, regularly or deeply or ongoing, and then even lost further through, translating that over the news feed and then into someone who's like sitting in New York City and hasn't had the opportunity to actually be there and see it on the ground. And both times I was like, wait, like, do you have just video of this? Do you have photo of this? Like, are you documenting? And I feel like almost every time I've had this conversation, the organizations, and obviously they're doing unbelievable work. That's what's getting me so amped. Yeah, they're like, oh, I mean, oof, we're so busy doing the impact. And by the way, I get it, right? That we have some video from this thing, but I don't know what it means. I don't know if it's get a college intern to take their new iPhone and just go everywhere that you're doing things and just document everything. But nothing is more powerful than visual storytelling. Today's day and age, you don't need it to be polished and primed. You need it to be actually more authentic and organic looking. And so the advice for organizations is somehow either empower your team or your staff or your interns or your anything, volunteers, to show up, document what you're doing, come, a drive along through a day, or come, a shadowing for whatever it may be, and then just story tell that content, because nothing, a picture says 1,000 words, and I guess a video says whatever times 1,000, like a million, whatever it is. Like, you have so much raw material that goes uncaptured every day and we all have the tools in our pocket with the high quality enough that's needed to actually make that happen.
I think that's a huge lesson, and it takes some bravery, right? For someone at the organization to say that, okay, so I won't be perfectly edited in and out of this thing. I won't look that amazing, but if you believe in your cause, then you should just open yourself. I write about this a lot. I call it philanthropic teleportation. Okay, so teleporting, your people, minimizing that distance between what you're doing and them in the comfort of your own home.
Beautiful.
And if you're doing good work, just simply open it up.
Yep.
Like you either need to do like this, if you want to get people to cry and laugh, you either have the biggest budget to produce this perfect video, tight 90 seconds, you cry and laugh, or just simply open up your life. Just bring them to an event like that and bring them into that world.
Hondo.
Yeah. So David, any closing remarks for, nonprofits out there who are trying to engage in a younger generation that are doing good work, just maybe need to tweak things up a little bit to get that younger donor to the table?
Talk to them, empower them, trust them, and co-create with them. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, David. Thank you very much.